Join Winnipeg Sports Talk, live from the NHL Draft in Las Vegas, presented by CoolBet, beginning on June 26th.
CoolBet presenting all of our draft specials. Incredible support from Patty, Jake, and the gang at CoolBet. We really appreciate that. But when it comes to draft, we always got to hit up our guy, Shane Malloy, Hockey Prospect Radio. Let's get to this draft class 2024. Of course, all year long, you work towards putting together your final list. Overall, Shane, how strong is the 2024 class of prospects for the National Hockey League?
Well, I think it's above average in terms of quantity. Yeah, the historical average is about 58 players will play 200 games or more. So I'm looking at 60. So it's a little bit above that, but it's a heavy defensive draft. It's a draft that is more big north-south wingers. And the other factor is there's a lot of two-way centers. And there's some obscure goaltenders that haven't got seen a lot because most of them are the best ones are Russian. And it's funny because I was at the Combine, there was other draft pundits there, and they were sort of like humming and hawing about the draft. And I said, I love this draft class. And they're looking at me kind of sideways and strange. Why? I said, this is a Shane kind of draft. These are all playoff types of players. They're like big forwards, go up and down, north, south, bang bodies, greasy area, big, lanky defensemen that take away time and space and can punish you, and goaltenders that can make some big saves. None of the fancy type players, and there are some, obviously, but it's more aching towards that type of player. So for me, this is my kind of draft, so I'm very excited about what that will look like because there's players who will get you to the playoffs and there's players going to help you win. And I'm more interested, if you look at my draft list, it'll be obvious to you what my preferences are and what I value because it's those types of players that really become more prominent on my list overall.
Shane Malloy with us getting ready for the draft. WST at the draft begins Wednesday, presented by CoolBet. Listen, the huge win for the Sharks, one of very few this year, was in the draft lottery. They're getting Macklin Celebrini. In a lot of draft lists I've seen, it's Celebrini, big gap, and then other players. You actually have two A-pluses. Artyom Levshunov. We talk about him in a minute, but I mean, just from your perspective, you covered a lot of number one overall prospects. We know Celebrini's going to be going to the Sharks. How special of a player is he? And how would he be compared to some of the other number one overall picks in recent years, Shane?
I think the distinction between him, he's closer to, I'd say, Nico Hischier, a combination of him and probably Jonathan Toews. And the reason being is because of their defensive prowess. One of the things that Celebrini takes pride in is playing defensively and having really good habits and understanding when you don't have the puck, you have to get that puck back as quickly as possible and reduce the number of scoring opportunities against your team. And I think he plays such a mature game, but still can produce points. And he recognizes that the quicker you get the puck back defensively, the faster you can turn in transition and get points. And he's going to go do that first in that respect. So that a part of his game, I think, is what sets him apart from other first-round picks. So we look at, Alexis Lafreniere, who's been really good this year as a winger, but the separation, he's not – like if I had a choice – and I said this on air already, so I'm not going to back down from it. But I have a choice between him and Bedard. I'll take Celebrini. I will take Celebrini.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll take the two-way forward over more of the flash. As much as I appreciate and you can admire what Bedard does offensively, there's a part of Celebrini's game. Look, this is a kid who went into college. He played in Hockey East. So he played against 21, 22, 23-year-old players. He didn't play against 17, 18, 19-year-old players in the dub. He played against older, bigger, faster players. Maybe not necessarily always as skilled, but a harder level of competition. And he still put up that point production. That says something about his game. But defensively, I just appreciate his attention to detail. So I'm sure I'll get some barbs thrown at me from the people in Regina. That's okay. It's okay. I'll take it, but it's just my preference of player.
Well, and is Celebrini at all comparable to a Barkov?
Just a smaller body. Like Barkov's a huge horse. He's a big, big man. And, you look at Celebrini, he's probably going to max out 6'1", 200 pounds. He's going to be more in the Jonathan Taves kind of a build. So, but they play some similar styles in terms of their attention to detail off puck. Because if you think about how often you don't have the puck, I would say not, even if you're an elite player and you play 20 minutes a game, 95% of the time you don't have the puck in your stick, if not 96. So what are you doing that other 96% of the time to help your team win? So I'm going to take the player that's a little bit more two-way and defensive oriented, because I just look at it. Look, Bedard's going to be fantastic, and he's going to be dynamic. He's going to produce a ton of points. But at the end of the day, I kind of lean towards those types of players because I think they help you win in the playoffs. Not saying Bedard won't, but he's just a more well-rounded player in that respect, and he's going to give up a little bit more offense to play better defense.
Well, it's certainly high praise for Macklin Celebrini. You have one other player with an A+ grade, and to be honest, it goes, after Celebrini, 4 straight defensemen on your list.
Yes.
And interestingly, 3 of the top 4 picks on your list from the NCAA, and the other are Russian. But tell us about Levshunov, who's playing at Michigan State, and why he has maybe a leg up on your list than the other top defense prospects that a lot of teams are salivating over.
Well, it's also, he has a combination of size at being at 6'2" and already 200 pounds as an 18-year-old, which is, that's a big body already. Skating ability, I think offensive and defensive hockey sense are both very good. I think defense is bordering on elite in terms of that respect. Very good puck support, puck habits, defensive habits are all very, very good in that respect. I think he can play on run a power play at the NHL level. I think he's going to be PK number 1 in that respect. So I think he has all those tools that are very good or higher across the board in that respect. Great personality. He's going to be a fun teammate. The guys in the room are going to love him. And that's where he was the only defenseman I had who I felt comfortable in saying he was going to be a number 1. Like the largest percentage of him playing at the NHL level could be as a number 1. And that other grouping was going to be probably more, maybe a 1 or a 2. But he was definitely a 1. And it's impressive. Once again, he's defending against college level players and college age players, not playing against the CHL, who are 3 years on average younger. And that's a significant difference when you're a freshman defenseman defending against 21, 22, and 23-year-old forwards.
Shane, that next group, 3 is Anton Silayev from Torpedo in Russia. Zeev Buium in Denver, NCAA, also on the blue line. Sam Dickenson, London in the Ontario Hockey League. These guys all project to be real top, but as you just mentioned, Levshunov, the most likely to become a clear number 1. And they're all left shots too, except for Levshunov. How important is handedness when it comes to the wants and needs of NHL teams?
Well, if you can get a right-handed shot, it's a bonus. It's like that's the cherry on top in that advantage. The majority of players are left-handed shots, but certainly it's a consideration. So if everything's being equal, you'll take the right-handed shot. And you look at the defenseman, and one of the things I go back to when I'm building my list, and mine's pre-automated. So what I do was I punch in all the data throughout the year, all the information I need, all my scouting reports, and it'll spit out a list. Now it's in tiers, and inside the tier, I can move the player around, but I can't move them outside that tier. So that I can only manipulate in, because it's a self-correcting mechanism for myself, right? So I don't cause myself some mistakes. So which is why all these defensemen are rated a little bit higher. It's also based on preferences. So I went back and looked at the trade deadline. I looked at free agency. I looked at the playoffs. What do GMs and coaches covet the most? And they weighted it appropriately for that, which is why my defensemen tend to be a little bit higher in that respect, because what is the cost of getting a top pairing D-man in free agency or at the trade deadline? It's an astronomical cost. So if you can get one in the draft, go do it. It's so much easier to go get a first or second line winger in a trade or free agency than it is to get a top pairing D. So if he's available, I'm pushing the forwards down, which is why that's reflecting upon my list. It took me a while to sort of completely alter some of my preferences. I just didn't weight them heavy enough, which is why I went that way. And I'm okay with that. And I've had some people ask me questions of why. And it's just my players on my list are more playoff oriented style. And I lean defense more than anything, unless that player really shows me that they deserve to be above that. So if you're a first line elite centerman, then you'll have a preference over a number 2 center. But if not, I'll take the number 2 defenseman every time.
Shane, after that group of 4 defense, there's Lindstrom and Medicine Hat and another Russian, Ivan Demidov, who's actually, maybe you can get into him a little bit more, a very intriguing prospect that seems to have a lot of people are talking about it. But just the fact that there are a number of Russians near the top, I wanted to ask you, where are things at with scouting the Russians? And we knew how challenging it was at the beginning of the pandemic and then the Ukraine war. Has that changed at all right now, or is there still maybe a little bit more mystery when it comes to the Russian prospects than anybody with a different passport?
Well, it's problematic. If you have a scout inside Russia, that's an advantage. If you don't, you're doing everything by video. Thankfully, David Milstein, one of the prominent Russian agents, did a camp just recently in Florida and brought a lot of his clients in that are all Russian prospects for them to get an opportunity for teams to see them. It is only a camp. It's only at the end of summer. So you have to take that with a grain of salt, but it's still an opportunity to view them. And I think the advantage for a guy like Ivan Demidov is that teams get to see him personally, get a chance to talk to him. He's a little bit bigger than expected. So those aspects matter. You want to be able to get as much information on him as you possibly can. I had to scout him all by video this year. It was really unfortunate that they weren't allowed to play in the U18s or U20s. And we understand why from a geopolitical standpoint. But he is uber talented in terms of elite hockey sense. He's a primary playmaker. He's an elusive and deceptive skater. He creates time and space. I'm not particularly fond of comparables, but his playing style is similar to Panarin in how he operates on the ice. So I think, in that respect, which is why, other people may have him higher, but I preference defense. I preference centermen ahead of forwards, especially on the wing, that are a little bit more dynamic in that respect. I tend to go a little bit more conservative, but I had him at number 7. But I mean, honestly, and this is one of the things that I've noticed through the history, that this is my 25th draft I've covered. And the separation between 3 or 4 spots or 5 spots in a draft is irrelevant. It honestly doesn't matter. So if somebody has somebody at 7 and another person has that player at 12, it's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. If it's 15 spots, okay, in the first round, that's significant. Or if it's 20 spots from like the end of the first into the second, maybe like into the late second, 30 spots, okay, that's significant. But 5 or 6 or 7 spots in the first round, I wouldn't worry about that. I know people kind of quibble over it, but it's really not. Over time, you look at the historical average, it doesn't make much of a difference.
Shane, as it pertains to the list, I mean, you've got 2 A+ grades, you've got 5 A's, 6 A minuses, or actually even, 2 big groups of A minus. But big picture, I mean, when you look at this first round, and actually let's go into the second round because it pertains to where the Jets are picking with that Montreal pick early in the second round. How would you categorize the tiers of talent in this draft, starting with Celebrini? Where is that next break? And at what point do we get into that area where, one team has a guy at 15 and one team might have him at 28, and, you're seeing some major differences of opinion of prospects from tier to tier?
Well, that certainly happens, and I've spoken to a lot of scouts and directors of scouting about putting their lists together, and their process is very similar to mine. It's just based on what their preferences are and what the general manager wants, what type of player they want, and what they have currently in their system. So when they talk about best player available, it's kind of an ambiguous term because it's really based on the individual and the organization what they deem is best player, because it's not the same across the board. So it's when they say that, I sort of chuckle a little bit. But from my list, obviously there's the grouping, the two guys up front, and then there's we have a grouping of 5 from 3 to 7, and I have another grouping of A- players from 8 to 13, another grouping of A- players from 14 to 20, and A- players are second line players or number 3 defensemen. So once I hit the 20 mark, now I'm getting into number 4 defensemen and third line forwards. And that B plus goes into multiple groups. So I have like 3 groupings of B plus players from 21 all the way to 43. And when I was talking to a couple of NHL guys, he's like, we have similar groupings in that respect, and you could manipulate those groupings, and you could have a guy who you had at 40 at 30, and I'd go, okay, that's fine. Because you could shrug your shoulders, and you can make an argument for that. Because in this draft class, there's a lot of guys who I would consider third line forwards, and that's a third line forward in the NHL, the best league in the world, and a number 4 defenseman. And I tend to give a little bit more preference, obviously, to the number 4 defenseman because they're harder to come by in that respect. So that's how the groupings kind of will work on my list, and most NHL teams as well.
You've got great contacts throughout the league with scouting staffs, but I know I've spoken with folks from the Jets organization on many occasions. Let me ask you about the Jets picking 6th in the second round. You kind of laid out that group of players that goes from the 20s into the 40s. That's right in and around where Winnipeg would be. What kind of a player do you think will be available? And do you have any leanings on, if you're doing a mock that went into the start of the second round and you were looking at players that Winnipeg may be targeting, is there any player or players that you'll be paying close attention to or maybe linking to the Winnipeg Jets before we hear who's picked?
Well, the advantage for me is that the Winnipeg group, the scouting staff's been together for a long time. So when you spread out and you take a look at the totality of what they've done, they leave breadcrumbs in terms of the style of players and the types of players they like. So if I'm looking at my list in that area, players that they would like, Ben Danford from the Oshawa Generals, defenseman, right-handed shot. He's a player that I could see the Winnipeg Jets be interested in. He's not flashy, but he's a really smart, defensive defenseman as a number 4 that can insulate a more offensively minded defenseman. Think about it in terms of when you watch Marc-Edouard Vlasic play, and what does he do? He just takes away time and space. He has great gaps, excellent stick, smart defensive awareness, and just drives forwards bonkers because they can't do anything with him. And he's highly competitive, blocks shots, does all the things. He's sort of he's the linchpin of your defense core. So I think Ben Danford could be there. I would consider Tarek Parasak from Prince George. He was a rookie last year in the Western Hockey League, put up a moronic amount of points, over 100 points as a rookie. Now, he's not the fastest player in terms of foot speed, but he's elusive. He has good deception in his skating. I think he's a dual threat in terms of passing and scoring goals. And the other advantage, a high level of hockey sense. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Tyler Toffoli in that respect, in how he operates, but I think he may have a higher offensive upside. So, and I think he'll drop a little bit in the draft because some people will be concerned about his foot speed. But those two players kind of jump out to me in terms of if they fell in that range, I wouldn't be surprised that Winnipeg picked them there.
Shane Malloy with us here on Winnipeg Sports Talk Daily. Shane, let me, before we go, ask you one other question, which I always love hitting you with. You have a unique way of looking at players, as do everyone scouts. They do it in their own way. We've got the list, but is there a guy or two that you consider your guys? Like a guy that maybe you're a lot higher on than maybe some of your contemporaries, and we should be paying attention as to where they go in the draft?
I'd probably say the two guys that I have higher on my list probably than others would be Adam Jiricek, a Czech defenseman who was injured a lot of the year, which is unfortunate. His brother was drafted really high in 6th overall by Columbus. And then I would say probably Jett Luchanko from Guelph, the Ontario Hockey League. So remember the scene in Rocky 2 when Mick is yelling at Rocky, what we need is speed? greasy fast speed, that's Luchanko. So, but he's a playmaker by trade. He's 5'11", about 190 pounds. Kind of reminds me a little bit of a combination between probably Robert Thomas in St. Louis and then Vincent Trocheck. If you smash those two players together, that would be Jett Luchanko. And he plays really responsible defense as well. So I think I have those players probably a little bit higher than others. Maybe Silayev, but I know most people have him in their top 10, but I have him at 3. So I like those unicorn defensemen. If I can get one, I'm going to draft one.